have the books. Oh, I need the books. Hold on. Damn. Hey there, creepy peeps. I'm Nightmare Maven. Welcome back to my channel. If you happen to be new here, I talk about spooky things all year long. So if you also like spooky things all year long, you should subscribe. This is gonna be possibly a longer video than normal, so let's get right into it. Mary Shelley's influence on the science fiction and horror genres cannot be understated. The story of a man creating life from dead tissue has been told and retold many times in many ways. The themes of Shelley's story have resonated with marginalized groups who have continued to keep her story alive, pun absolutely intended. The dark beauty of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is that it can be interpreted many different ways. And I recently read two books that were both inspired by Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and took the themes that are present in the original text to completely different lengths, and I loved them both. The themes of feminism, motherhood, science and ethics within science, patriarchal structures, they took these themes and just ran with them, but I wanted to talk about them in relation to Frankenstein just to show how relevant Shelley's story still is today. So the two books I'm going to be talking about are Hideous Progeny by C.E. McGill and The Children on the Hill by Jennifer McMahon. Like I said, I'm going to be talking about them in relation to the themes that are present in the original text, which is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. It will get vaguely spoilery as I delve into the themes of these books. I won't be discussing the twists. I won't be discussing how each book ends. I'm not going to be like giving you a play-by-play of every single scene that happens in these books. If hopefully by the end of this video I've inspired you to read one or both of these, you can definitely watch this video and then go read these. I'm not going to spoil any major things for you. So I'm going to start with Our Hideous Progeny, which is billed as a queer feminist sequel to Frankenstein. In Our Hideous Progeny, we're following a character, Mary Sutherland, who is an inspiring paleontologist. But of course, she is outshined by her husband only because of patriarchal structures. Because this is set in the 1850s and women didn't have formal education for stuff like paleontology and therefore had no standing in scientific societies. Mary comes across the secret writings of her great uncle, Victor Frankenstein, and decides to try and recreate the experiment, but putting her own twist on it by building and bringing to life a plesiosaurus. Frankenstein, as an original text, is rife with feminism. It goes hard with its critique of patriarchal structures and its dominance over the feminine, just anything falling under the umbrella of the feminine. Even today, Shelley's story about a cis man creating life without a uterus is reflective of how men have always fought to maintain control over women's and uterus owners' bodies. Mary Shelley lost one of her own children shortly after giving birth, much like Mary Sutherland in Our Hideous Progeny. In regards to this book, the loss of her child is one of the things that kind of inspires her to recreate her uncle's experiments. And within this book, it feels like that decision is kind of like Mary exerting control over the situation. This patriarchal notion that women and uterus owners only function in society is to have children. It hits hard as a modern novel, although it's set in the past, given all the idiotic things male politicians have said about women's bodies. By recreating life even with a non-human form, it feels like Mary is kind of saying, well, here, since you're convinced my body can do all of these ridiculous things, here, I'll even just create life from dead tissue. And while Victor in Mary Shelley's story is free to create a monster that is disastrous beyond anyone's imagination, with little to no recourse, Mary Sutherland is at the mercy of her husband, who frequently depletes the household funds in gambling and attacks others at this, I'll just call it the society, but it's like a scientific society where men read each other essays and shit like that. But he frequently attacks others' work instead of just presenting his own work and doing his own experiments and findings in order to try and climb the ladder. And it only ends up hurting him, which ends up hurting Mary as well, which she has no control over, unfortunately. Like, she doesn't even have access to certain libraries because they're run by the society, and the society doesn't accept women, so she has to rely on her husband to get these texts for her. So because she has limited access to resources, this leads her to her great uncle's writings. Through the process of Mary recreating her uncle's experiments, we get much more of a glimpse of the misogyny going on in this society, which is still relevant today. Henry and his friend Finley Clark, who also ends up helping with the experiments to bring the plesiosaurus to life, know already that they're going to be the ones that present this to society, even though Mary has done all of the work, from literally building the creature to finding the key to giving the creature that spark of life and maintaining that life, not just keeping it alive for a couple of seconds. So beyond just contributing her great uncle's writing, she literally like does everything pretty much. When it finally comes time to present their findings, it's clear that Mary's not even going to be able to get into the society with this amazing thing that she's done. This is obviously very rooted in our reality, in which men often are given recognition or even prizes for things women invented or discovered. And even after the process is over and they've successfully brought the creature to life, all Henry and Finley can talk about are, you know, the recognition that they're going to get and how this is going to improve their standing in the society and blah, 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 blah. And they even forget to take care of the creature, which also falls to Mary. I say falls to Mary, but Mary actually cares about the creature, which it's very clear that Henry and Finley Clark do not. Which, in comparison to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where Victor is overcome with ambition to create life, only to be disgusted with the creature literally as soon as it's alive. Here's a direct quote from Frankenstein. This is the moment the creature opens its eyes, so it's literally just been brought to life. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this, I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Compared to the first lines in our Hideous Progeny, when the plesiosaurus opens its eyes, Mary's thoughts are, I loved it. From the moment I met its strange and terrible eyes, I loved it. I feel like this perfectly shows the way men throughout history have exploited the earth and its inhabitants and resources to no end. Victor is repulsed by his creation immediately. There is no hesitation. And we all know what happens after Victor abandons the creature. He ultimately gets people killed because of this. And then he tries to shift the blame off of himself. I just like to remind people of this all the time because Victor Frankenstein is an asshole. Mary, on the other hand, obviously has an appreciation for the creature that she's brought to life, even though she is slightly terrified of it, which I think is very telling, because she knows ultimately that they brought it into the world, whether it wanted to be brought into the world or not. And that leaves them with a responsibility to take care of it, which the men don't care to acknowledge at all. Right now I'm going to shift focus to the children on the hill. So the story of the children on the hill takes place in 2 timelines. The first is in 1978, where Violet and Iris live in Vermont with their brother Eric and their grandmother, who runs a renowned psychiatric hospital. Just to keep the summary just vague enough and short enough, the girls, over the course of a couple of weeks, discover things about the hospital that completely throw into question everything they thought they knew about themselves and their grandmother. The second timeline takes place in 2019, where we are following Lizzie. Lizzie hunts monsters for a living for a podcast, and she finds herself in Vermont tracking down cases of missing girls, and she starts to believe that her own sister may be the monster behind it all. This one is a little harder to talk about the themes without getting into spoiler territory, so things are going to be a little bit vague, but just bear with me. So Children on the Hill takes a completely different approach to the Frankenstein story, kind of asking the question of like the purpose of creating life from dead tissue and potentially what kind of person might want to create their own life from scratch, create their own society from scratch. You know, like essentially creating society in the way that they think it should be. But it makes sense because Frankenstein's monster in the original text doesn't ask to be brought into the world, and yet he is anyway. Similarly, Violet and Iris have been molded by their grandmother in ways that they soon start to find out, but previously couldn't even comprehend, by somebody who decided to pass judgment on their own lives and their own families. Kind of like how Victor Frankenstein decided to play God by creating life from dead tissue, there is a character that I won't name because of spoilers who also decides to kind of play God. And I think this works especially well given how women and feminine presenting people are told to behave, dress, etc. by society and by cishet men who heard an idiot with a podcast talk about how women really are and think they have us all figured out. And it's usually the most unhinged shit you've ever heard. Without spoiling too much, the heart of the themes of The Children on the Hill is the patriarchy and white supremacy. The patriarchy and white supremacy kind of represent the Dr. Frankenstein figure, and women and feminine presenting people represented by Violet and Iris are the monsters that are shaped by this society. And in this book, actually Bride of Frankenstein is referenced quite a bit, particularly the themes of the monster taking agency over their own selves, their own beings, much like the bride rejecting the monster outright and then the monster deciding to destroy himself at the end. So as I mentioned in the summary for The Children on the Hill, Lizzie in our like kind of present day timeline is a monster hunter for a podcast that she is very successful at. And it parallels with the timeline in the past because Violet, Iris, and Eric are obsessed with monsters, and they have like their own monster club, and they have this book that they're writing about monsters and how to spot monsters and what to do to destroy a monster. And of course it's the monsters that you're kind of thinking of, you know, like werewolves, vampires, etc. And through Violet and Iris's story, they learn about the human kind of monster. As they start to uncover the secrets of the hospital, the girls start to question whether or not they are monsters themselves. Kind of feels like a play on the monstrous feminine archetype, but instead of fulfilling the typical monstrous feminine roles of like witch, mother, vampire, etc., the story explores how society both creates and is terrified of women because they see them as monsters in and of themselves just by existing. And I really want to get more into that idea, but that goes into major spoiler territory, so I'm gonna avoid it. Overall, both The Children on the Hill and our Hideous Progeny are absolutely worthy successors to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I think they both prove how relevant Shelley's story still is today. Its themes of feminism, misogyny, reproduction and reproductive rights, science, ethics, and in its queer themes as well. I think I mentioned it for our Hideous Progeny, but in The Children on the Hill as well, there are queer themes throughout, which I didn't get into, again, because of spoilers, but they are present. So if you've read either of these books or both of these books, please let me know in the comments what you thought about them. I'd love to talk more about them and maybe get into spoilers with you guys in the comments. And just in the comments too for funsies, let me know your favorite Frankenstein prequel, sequel, reimaginings, retellings, book or movie form. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was a bit of a longer one, but if you liked it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you're new here, become a creepy peep today, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Until then, stay strange. Bye.